What will the Denver Broncos cornerback position look like opposite of Patrick Surtain in the 2024 NFL season? We'll break all that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Cornerback is one of the top positions we will have our eye on here for the Denver Broncos all throughout the entire offseason. What might it look like going into 2024? We'll break all that down on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to us wherever you get your podcast for free, or if you watch us on YouTube, you can get us there, interact with other members of Broncos Country in the YouTube comments. Do us a favor, subscribe or follow down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long, including all throughout the entire offseason, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. I'm Cody Roark. I cover the Denver Broncos as a reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside by Sayre Bedinger. He covers the Broncos for predominantly orange.com every single day. So check out those websites respectively. Check out our work here. But we got a lot to break down here as we continue our position kind of review and preview series as we get ready for what is expected to be a very wild offseason in Broncos country. And Sayre, we always like to review the most recent year as to what happened with each position. And so for the Broncos in 2023, the cornerback position, I felt like coming into the season, we probably had a lot more optimism about, okay, hey, look, you got Patrick Surtain entering his third year in the NFL. Damarri Mathis showed a lot of promise as a rookie. What is this position group going to look like? K'Waun Williams, he's a guy who's healthy going into the offseason. And then once you get to training camp, you start to see different things happen. And then in-season madness, the 70-point, output that you allow to the Miami Dolphins, it really changed things, and it really changed, I think, the optics and the outlook of the cornerback position in season. But Vance Joseph and everybody made changes. The one constant and the one consistent element, though, was PS2, who's obviously going to the Pro Bowl this up, and on top of that, he was a first-team All-Pro in the NFLPA players vote, which I think matters a little bit more than the media vote. So, hey, pretty good season for Patrick Surtain, but once again, the conversation about the cornerback position this offseason, it continues.
It does, and it's really one of those things where do you credit Vance Joseph and the defensive staff with the way they handled everything at this position, or do you kind of ding them for it? Is this a knock against them in terms of your evaluation for last year because of, like we talked about all season long, Damarri Mathis, kind of one of the shocking situations there where based on how he played as a rookie in 2022, you expected him to look like, a viable starter opposite Pat Surtain in 2023. Obviously, that ended up being kind of a disaster early on, and Damarri was benched for Fabian Moreau, who was brought in during training camp when Riley Moss got injured, and it was like this whole musical chairs going on at the cornerback position, and you really didn't know if you were going to have that stability because Fabian Moreau, even you and I, Cody, we talked about it, like we were wondering, is he even going to make the roster? I mean, like, is he being brought in as a camp body? Is this a thing where he's going to make the team? Because also had Tremont Smith at the cornerback position, but he was really more so brought in for his special teams ability. So it was a musical chairs at the position. But like I said, do you look at this position group as a positive for the coaching staff and the way that things turned out because of the way Fabian Moreau came in, held down the fort for, especially during that great stretch of play by the defense, as well as the emergence of Jaquan McMillan in the slot with, as you mentioned, K'Waun Williams coming into training camp looking healthy, and then all of a sudden, he's out for the year. I mean, I look at it both ways. You're kind of seeing these guys make lemonade with lemons, but also you look at that situation with Damarri Mathis and you're thinking to yourself, what happened there? Like, why did that not go well? And can he even bounce? That's going to be one of the questions we talk about. But in your opinion, Cody, which way do you look at that? I guess it's not necessarily even optimism versus pessimism. It's more so of like beauty's in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. How do you assess the cornerback position with everything that transpired last year?
Well, I think training camp is probably where we should start, right? You mentioned Riley Moss, the core muscle surgery. He had to have that operated on. He started off the season on injured reserve coming out of, that move happened once the 53-man roster was set. If they would have done that during training camp, he would have been ineligible to play for the season. I think people are also forgetting Damarri got hurt during training camp as well. He suffered a leg injury, ankle injury during camp. And look, yeah, I don't think through the first couple of weeks, I don't think that lingered a little bit, but we saw it. I think Denver's defense needed a spark. They needed a change. And unfortunately, that had to come after a week 3. You lose by 50 points, you give up 70. The defense, I think, in that game had 24, 26 total missed tackles against the Dolphins. And then all of a sudden, you're just like, wow, like Denver's just a disaster right now. And that led to a lot of personnel changes. You mentioned like Sang Bassi getting benched and getting cut. You have Jaquan stepping into the role there. Damarri at one point, I think it was really after the Chiefs game on Thursday Night Football where the Broncos decided to go in a different direction in terms of cornerback on the outside with Fabian, and Fabian stepped up and did pretty good for the middle part of the season, fell off toward the end of the season. Now we don't think he's going to be back this upcoming year. There's a lot we'll break down there. I just think that the cornerback position, really outside of Surtain, part of me wonders too, we saw an aggressive nature from Vance Joseph after they made a little bit of a switch in terms of their scheme, their philosophy. We've talked about that here on this show. But on top of that as well, sometimes their scheme, they played a lot of off coverage. They played a lot of cover 3. And that's where teams attack the back shoulder throw quite a bit. They attack the sideline, and Denver would just get carved up in those, intermediate areas where they knew, hey, it's zone coverage. We know where the soft spot's going to be, and it's all about timing. And that's where guys like Jared Goff came in and carved them up. Aiden O'Connell in that last game of the regular season. Bailey Zappi, of all people, having a really good game against the Broncos defense on Christmas Eve. And that's not so much on the cornerback position itself. I think it's a combination of things. You can talk about coverage. You can talk about being out of alignment. And you can also talk about the lack of pressure overall, and that impacts defensive back play. To me, I think that's what really summarized the 2023 Denver Broncos in the secondary. I was a little bit disappointed in the cornerback position overall, just because you expect those guys to make more plays on the football. The only guy, realistically, that made a ton of plays on the ball, Jaquan McMillan, this past season. And I think that's a bright spot as we move forward into, obviously, 2024. But, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that. It was a rough season. And I want to hit on something too real quick here before we get into talking about the questions about the position. Like with Damarri Mathis, you even said it before the season, like, hey, like development is never linear. It can be up and down. And so you kind of put out like a realistic expectation, like, hey, he had a really good rookie season. He may drop off a little bit in his second year. But like, could he bounce back? Like that's something we'll obviously talk about. I will say this. It's crazy to see how fast a fan base can completely just give up on a player. Like Damarri had a rough stretch in 2023. Of course, it led to him getting benched. I don't think fans should give up on him yet, though. I still think he's very much in the mix. He had a great attitude about it. Like he could have just been negative and down. He just attacked it, and he embraced the role on special teams. So, like I said, Broncos Country, don't count out Damarri just yet. And that's one of the questions that we'll talk into here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Will he be able to bounce back in 2024? We'll break all that down here on today's episode of the show. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything, and gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. And the 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Or you could check out the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. Once again, that's shopnissanusa.com.
Can Damarri Mathis bounce back in 2024? And is he going to have some competition there with Riley Moss for the starting outside cornerback position opposite of Pat Surtain II here this coming offseason? The cornerback position for the Denver Broncos is one of a number of question marks, maybe not the most significant, but it's certainly a topic where we're going to dive into. We're going to talk about potential acquisitions the Broncos made. Maybe, hey, I'll tease this. Maybe an old friend could come back to Denver in 2024. We'll see about that and we'll talk about it. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to every single one of you everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos out there, where you can find the show anywhere that you listen to podcasts, free and available readily every single day, especially during the offseason. When you rock with us, you know that you're going to get position breakdowns of every single transaction, every coaching move, whether guys are coming or going. Cody and I are going to discuss every aspect of this offseason all year long on Locked On Broncos. So subscribe, listen to the podcast on your commute. Join us if you want to take us on your treadmill walk, if it's cold outside, or if you're walking outside, starting this, wherever it is, bring us with you. We appreciate you so much for doing that. And if you watch on YouTube as well, jump in the comments section with other members of Broncos Country and let your voice be heard. Cody, can Damarri bounce back in 2024? I think this is a huge issue with projecting, right? Because a lot of times fans, like last year at this time, nobody was talking about Jaquan McMillan, really, even with his promising play against the Chargers. Nobody was talking about him as a legitimate option in the rotation for 2024. And I think it's that unknown that people would rather just have. I'd rather have the big money free agent, or I'd rather throw a high draft pick at a position so I can know in my mind that the team is like, where the team is at. If they're spending a lot of money on a guy, or a first or second round pick on a guy, that gives fans peace of mind, thinking like, well, the team's investing in this guy, so obviously I can buy in to that investment. But with guys that are, mid to late round picks, or guys who are coming off a year of struggle, it's much, much harder for fans to jump on board with this guy, or, at any position. And I think that's kind of the tension where we're at cornerback. Nobody saw anything from Riley Moss in 2023. I mean, we didn't like what we saw from Damarri Mathis in 2023. So fans are now wondering, how do we kill this need with fire? And who's going to replace these two guys who are unknowns? But I don't think that's necessarily how the Broncos are thinking, Cody. I think it's going to be a battle between these two guys for a starting job.
To my knowledge, that's what the expectation is, at least going into OTAs and going into mini camp and then going into training camp, is that cornerback 2 opposite of Pat. It's wide open. And look, George Paton said it as well. They view Riley Moss as a starter in this league. They view Damarri Mathis as a starter in this league. George Paton has said that about both of those guys. And those guys are going to compete. And I think that probably would have been the case a little bit last year until Riley had his surgery. And then obviously Damarri had an injury as well that held him out. So that's why, when they brought in Fabian, we were like, is this just a camp body there? I think for a guy like Damarri Mathis, like, to me, I think he can bounce back. And look, I think he will. I think he's got a great mindset. I've had a chance to talk with Damarri all throughout the season, even when he was not playing. And look, he's just, biding his time, staying in the, studying the playbook even more, being in the film, like just going extra hard in practice. And that's all you can do, right? Because when you get benched, it's really kind of out of your control. It's like, hey, you need to stay ready. You need to get yourself ready in the event we call you back up to play again. Damarri has started in the National Football League. He's gone against some really good wide receivers. He's played big in some games. So it's not like he can't do it. He's already had a proven sample size of being able to do it, but he just had a stretch of games where he was struggling, getting called for penalties. I think the one thing that fans are always going to reflect on is that Thursday night game where Mahomes was running out of bounds and it didn't even look like he was going to try to hit him at that point. And then he got to the outside, and a whole nother conversation for another day. But that's just football. And I think we get so caught up in the little part of it that we expand it and say, okay, hey, he had a stretch of bad plays. This is who he is. And I think that's where the mindset goes. Football, Sayre, as you and I have seen it, as we've watched players and as fans listening to the show, they've seen players who have struggled maybe one season rise up. Look at Nick Bonito, his rookie year, struggled. Look at him in his second year, rose up. Now it's a little different here for Damarri because rookie year had a pretty good year. Second year, struggled a little bit. That doesn't mean that that's going to be who he is the rest of his NFL career. And as we know with George Paton, the Broncos scouting department and their coaching staff, they're going to give him every opportunity to get back out there and play again, because guess what? They drafted him and he's been a guy that can play. So I don't think it's a question of can he, I just think it's will he. And I think there's a good chance that he could, but it just depends on how he responds to competition, which now leads us to throwing this out there here. Will Riley Moss be stepping into a bigger role this upcoming season? I think we saw him in the dime package toward the end of the season here for the Broncos. He's special teams guy. He's gotten, like, in my opinion, he got noticeably faster this year. That's a good element for him to have. And like I said, he's just a guy that understands. He's got a very good football IQ. I've enjoyed talking to him, getting to pick his brain about defense a little bit. He's also a guy that's going to be heavily in the mix. That's why I think in training camp is going to be these two guys competing for the starting job, which in my opinion, some people are like, oh, it's not flashy. I think that's a good thing. I think you want to see your young guys battle for a spot like this.
You really do. And I think I'm in the same boat as you, Cody. I would much rather the Broncos be able to settle the position with one of these two guys as opposed to saying, hey, we got to go out to free agency. Because what does that mean? Well, that means that your evaluation 2 years in on players that you just drafted. I mean, you're just wiping it off the table and saying, you know what? Screw these guys' development. We're done with it. And we're not buying into it anymore. We're going to put somebody else in that role. I hate that mentality,
Yeah.
and I don't like it from the fans either. I know I've seen a lot of mock drafts out there from national experts predicting the Alabama corners to Denver, and we've talked about that before as well. And while those are good players, I mean, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, those are good prospects, those are good players. Probably would look like good picks on paper. I want to see the Broncos develop the guys they have in house. And you mentioned earlier the need for these players to start getting their hands on the ball. I think that's where Riley Moss can really make some hay for this defense. This
Mhm.
is probably one of the biggest reasons why the team drafted him. I got to watch every single game of his at college. I don't get to do that for every prospect, but Riley Moss, he's a Hawkeye, baby. So I watched every single game that he played from the days when he was not even a scholarship player all the way up until the point where he becomes a third round NFL draft prospect. This guy, if he does one thing well, Cody, he gets his hands on the football. He's always around the ball, always making plays on the ball, always looking to, and not just make plays on the ball, but to make a play after he's gotten the ball. Like he's thinking a few steps ahead. He wants to score a touchdown defensively. That because at Iowa, I mean, they're scoring more touchdowns than the offense, quite frankly. And so he's thinking to himself, I got to not only get my hands on the ball, I got to score. And we saw Riley Moss do that time and time again as a Hawkeye. And that's really what he brings to the table that's so special. The athletic metrics, I think people were surprised by it just because a lot of people are saying, well, he's going to have to transition to safety at the NFL level. Athletically, he's just not there to play outside corner. That's a bunch of baloney. He can play outside corner in the
Yeah.
NFL, and I think he's going to be a really good one. The Broncos traded up to get him. Remember that. When you're talking about writing down your off-season depth charts, if you're listening to the show and you like to do that, you're like, all right, who can we pencil in here, there? I think Riley Moss is that guy, Cody. As much as we want to see Damarri Mathis bounce back, and we do, Riley Moss is the guy that this coaching staff, when Sean Payton, Vance Joseph, George Payton, the scouting department, they all come together. They said, this is the guy that we want to trade a future third-round pick to move up and go get. So I think that belief in him, I don't think it's gone anywhere. I'm sure, and
Mm.
you would know that better than I, based on what you've heard from Riley and the coaches that you've talked to and things like that. But I just feel like the team is heavily invested in him to the point that we should maybe feel a little bit. We should be able to sleep at night knowing that Riley Moss is possibly going to be cornerback 2 in Denver in 2024.
I think it's a very safe bet to make right now, to be honest with you. If you're listening to this or watching this right now, that's where things are trending. And I think the one thing that we can guarantee about the Broncos cornerback position, on the outside at least, not talking about the nickel, on the outside, your top three guys that you know are guaranteed to be back in 2024, Patrick Surtain, Riley Moss, and Damarri Mathis. So that's going to also lead to some other questions as well about, hey, will the Broncos invest in maybe adding some depth in free agency? Will there be certain guys back? We'll break it all down here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, and we'll give a look at our outlook on 2024 at the position specifically, including inside the nickel. You're going to get that on today's brand new episode of the show. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, what we see in the forecast for the Broncos cornerback position. We have some guaranteed roster spots we know are already going to be there, but there are some questions behind Surtain, behind Riley Moss, Damarri Mathis, Jaquan McMillan. What will that position room look like in 2024? We'll break it all down here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, we just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked On Broncos free on YouTube, where you can watch us every single day. You can engage in the comment section with other members of Broncos Country. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. So if you're a Broncos fan, you're brand new, you're loving the vibe of what we have going on here on the show, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team from an objective point of view every single day, all year long. Let's get into the forecast here and take a look at it. I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit in the build-up and in the last segment. We know that Patrick Surtain is going to be back. It's going to be his fourth year. We all know that the extension could be coming up for him at any point. Damarri Mathis, Riley Moss, those guys are going to be back. And even on top of that, you're going to look at Jaquan McMillan, who's going to be the starting nickel for Denver in 2024. I mean, unless there's like something drastic that really changes here. But I think the bigger question here, Sayre, is, okay, if those are your guys, who's going to make up the rest of your depth at that position? Because usually at cornerback, you either have 6 guys at that position and then 5 guys at safety, or you have, 5 guys at cornerback and 6 guys at safety. I don't think Denver needs to have 6 guys at safety, even though that they've been banged up in that department. We'll talk about safeties on tomorrow's episode of the show. But I do think they need to look at maybe bringing in a guy in free agency. And look, we already know they're not going to be big spenders in the first wave. So what might that look like here for Denver in 2024? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you're looking at potential reclamation projects, which that's really one of my brands of free agency. I just feel like we've seen the proof in the pudding for a lot of teams around the league that, hey, when you buy low on guys with a lot of talent, that's the type of move that can really pay dividends for you. A lot of times those big money free agents don't end up always working out. And in the Broncos case, that has really been the issue, hasn't it? I mean, look at any number of guys, the offensive tackle position really rings out as one of the most glaring examples through the years of bad moves that the team has made. But especially when you're talking about corners recently, I mean, the Kyle Fullers of the world, the Ronald Darbys of the world. I mean, those guys have been really good players in their career, and Darby's having a great year for Baltimore. Couldn't stay healthy in Denver, and the Broncos invested. That was one of the bigger free agent signings early on for George Payton. So I think you got to be cautious here. I love the idea of somebody like a Jeff Okudah, who was a recent top 5 draft pick, who's got a lot of talent, a chip on his shoulder, somebody that could come in and blow you away and win a position like the starting corner opposite Pat Surtain. Probably got a lot of buddies in the Broncos locker room with guys like Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, and others. But I would love to see something like that. Or what about an old friend, Cody? If you look at some of the free agent corners, and a guy who has a connection to Vance Joseph. Remember, the Broncos were at the 2018 Senior Bowl. They got their hands on the prospects there. They were able to coach up these guys one-on-one. One of the guys that they picked from that class was Isaac Yiadom, who was a 3rd-round pick out of Boston College, one of Vance Joseph's first couple of years in Denver there. Didn't end up working out for the Broncos. They ended up trading him. But Cody, since he's bounced around the league, I think Broncos fans would be surprised to know that this past season for the New Orleans Saints of all teams, Isaac Yiadom allowed just 48.9% of passes into his coverage to be completed, had a career high 14 passes broken up, and became a starter for them down the line this past year. So that's an interesting name to be on the lookout for if the Broncos are questioning, well, we don't know what we've got in Damarri Mathis, and we're not sure about our evaluation after what we saw last year. Riley Moss with the injuries, is he best suited in this particular type of role, etc.? I mean, maybe a guy like Yiadom would come back to Denver and potentially start. But I think those are the types of acquisitions you're looking at, is like under the radar type guys.
No, and I agree with you there too. And I think for Isaac Yiadom and throughout the season, we always call him Ike Diesel. That's his nickname, Ike Diesel. I reached out to Ross Jackson, our Locked On Saints host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and he had nothing but high praise for Isaac Yiadom. He was a guy I consistently saw him tweet about and talk about in his shows this year. So he's really grown and developed. And look, I think maybe part of the whole thing with Yiadom in Denver was he got in Vic Fangio's doghouse, which, as we all know, Vic Fangio, I mean, now the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, there are a lot of like nasty reports coming out of Miami that players did not like him. Felt like we've heard that here before, and he's just old school in that regard. And maybe that's what Philly's looking for. But I think Vic and his demeanor, I think that impacted Isaac during his time here with the Broncos, right? Because we've even seen the flashes that he's had as a player, even as a young guy. He wasn't a popular pick amongst the Broncos fans, especially when he's giving up some passes. But he's also one of those guys that I think you look at and you're like, hey, this is a guy that has grown year in and year out. That's why I always say, like, you can have a rough first couple of years in the NFL, but if you're still cutting your teeth and you're grinding, you're making plays as you're getting there, whether you cut your teeth on special teams and then see a roll on defense, that's what Isaac Adam has done. He's gone from several teams at this point, and now he's kind of found his footing at this point, and he's now a veteran in the National Football League, which is weird to say, but it's all about the environment. So that's not a bad option here for the Broncos to maybe take a look at. I know you mentioned Jeff Okudah. That was a guy that when the NFL Combine was going on, you and I were talking about, like, man, this is the guy that we have our eye on. Don't think Denver's going to be in a position to get him. And obviously they weren't there, but he spent time with the Detroit Lions, got a new start. I think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he play for the Falcons this past season, if I'm not mistaken?
Yep.
And so he's just looking for the right opportunity. We'll see where things are at here with the cornerback market. I think Tremont Smith will be back for Denver. Obviously, not much in terms of cornerback, but more so for special teams. He was their top player in that unit this year, and he's going to obviously take up a depth spot there, but Denver has to invest in the depth there. And also, it's like, can you get a guy that can play the nickel behind Jaquan? Like, you're going to need another guy there. Or is that role maybe envisioned if they bring PJ Locke back at safety? Are they going to play PJ inside the other slot, which they did quite a bit this past season, right? Or is it going to be Caden Stearns that does that? Or is it going to be another guy like a JL Skinner? I mean, the other safety position kind of affects maybe what the personnel side is going to look like here for Denver this year. But I'm very curious to see what Sean Payton and George Payton and Vance Joseph specifically have planned for the secondary for all the things that we've touched on.
And I think another name to keep an eye on is Art Green, who the Broncos signed to the active roster right at the end of the year, and did that to prevent him from signing a reserve futures deal on any other roster. So Art Green is a guy who is scout team dog, basically a 10 out of 10 on the RAS scale in terms of, height, weight, speed, athleticism, explosiveness, and somebody that the Broncos believe in his traits. And they also believe that they can coach him up to become a contributor with those traits. So is he somebody to be watching out for this coming season? Just kind of maybe not exactly the same, but kind of like Jaquan McMillan was the year prior, where the Broncos bring him up late because they've seen a lot of things on the practice field and want to protect him from signing with any other teams. Could be a little something there with Art Green as well.
I think that's something to keep an eye on here specifically. And look, it's just one of those things because that's what Jaquan was. Jaquan was in that situation, though. We got to see Jaquan a little early, as you mentioned, that 1 week 18 game against the Chargers. We got to see him play. We didn't get to see Art play. He did get called up, but he was a game day inactive for that week 18 game against the Las Vegas Raiders. But I know that the Broncos are very, very high on Art. He's going to get an opportunity. He'll be in training camp once again competing. And I think there's, the door's kind of wide open there at cornerback. And the thing is, I think with his size and athleticism that he has, not only can he play on the outside, he can also play on the inside, which factors in if you can kill maybe two birds with one stone, having a guy who can play both versatile positions. I mean, it gives you options. And also, when we talk about the unknown certainty, like once again, we're talking about the unknown certainty of Russell Wilson's contract situation here. It gives you cost-effective players who could step into larger roles that maybe surprise everybody. So I think Art Green is a name to watch here in Broncos Country. But Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of Locked On Broncos. We've reviewed the cornerback position from 2023. We've taken a look ahead at 2024. What are your thoughts here on what Denver should do? Who's going to start at cornerback, in your opinion, opposite of PS2 this upcoming season? If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments. If you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, send us a thought on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But for all you everyday listeners out there, here's what you can expect on tomorrow's episode of the show. We've taken a look at cornerbacks. Now we're going to take a look at the back end of the secondary at the safety position. What will that position look like in 2024? You'll get that and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode of the show.